Hello and welcome to the third episode of ElysianNxt Podcast. I'm Chris, I'm the CEO and founder of ElysianNxt. I'm here today with Matthias Coessens, who's the MD for Europe. Today we're going to discuss what are the regulatory changes going on in Europe and what's in petto for the European banks. Matthias, it's great to see you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, glad to be here in Bangkok again.
Okay, good to hear.
Yeah.
2 years ago, you moved from Jakarta, Indonesia, back to Europe. Was that all planned?
Yes and no. Planned, I would say. Yeah, we had some ideas after 10 years. My wife and I had some ideas to maybe move back to Europe, thinking about kids and so on and so forth. So it was a bit of plans in our heads to move back to Europe by the end of 2020. Yet then, of course, my wife got pregnant of twins. COVID happened, February, March 2020. So that made us decide to move back a bit earlier. So we moved back in March 2020. Yeah, we worked. We still worked remote for some time, and that we managed to do that. I mean, at the same time with the pregnancy, we were all going fine. Okay. Now, same time, we thought from a business perspective, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to start exploring back, our home market, Europe.
Okay, good. And for the viewers, by the way, that resulted in 2 beautiful daughters, twins. So business-wise, what has it been like the last 2 years?
Europe is in a bit of in-between stage when it comes to regulatory software, when it comes to regulations in general. We had CRR2, capital requirements regulations that became live, that did go live in Europe June 2020. Mm-hmm. And still banks are now a bit settled, they're quiet, but at the same time we see it's more of a replacement market for regulatory software now. We see that banks aren't particularly happy with some of their existing, especially credit risk systems, and then more particularly IFRS 9. Yeah, that's okay. That's what we see. Where am I pointing at? For instance, we see that they're not happy with performance, for instance, of their existing systems after 5 years, almost give or take. Implementation happened. They did go live in 2018. Implementation happened throughout the course of 2017. So about 5 years in existence, and that's where they're struggling. Having said that, from a business perspective, we're doing good with Elysian. We have now 4 clients in Europe. We just agreed terms with one of the biggest players in Europe. So very exciting for that.
Okay, that's good to hear. Can you elaborate a little bit more about why banks are unhappy with the systems they have in place for credit risk? You mentioned performance, so how does that impact the banks?
Yeah, maybe to put some to add some light to that. IFRS 9 was a forward-looking expected credit loss calculation. So banks had to somehow look at the macroeconomic environment and forecast under a number of scenarios what would happen to our expected credit losses when, from a macroeconomic standpoint, this and this and this happens. Now, I don't have to explain the macroeconomic volatility has been unseen for the last couple of years. Ukraine, we had COVID, we had inflation. So now, of course, banks are feeling the need to run more and more stress tests. Not only banks are feeling the need from a management perspective, but the ECB is getting stricter on banks and say you have to run more what-if analysis. And you can't just run that once a year, those stress tests. No, you have to periodically run that. And actually, if we ask you to do so, a couple of days later, you should give us the results. And that's something that banks did not somehow see coming when they were thinking of having to look for an IFRS 9 platform. Yeah. So that wasn't taken into account at the very start when they were looking for systems, which resulted in, maybe not a big focus on running these calculations fast and in an easy way run a stress test. Yeah. And that's exactly what banks are struggling with right now.
Yeah, think it was also the first time that the regulator introduced a forward-looking element and kind of rec risk. Solutions.
Typically accounting has always been reporting what had happened. It's actually quite a big change that now the accountants have to, in a way, in their numbers, in the profit and loss numbers, have to have forecasts in there, you could argue.
Yeah. Now, if it's such a big challenge for banks, given that credit risk for most of the banks is the most important financial risk ratio that they need to measure, what does prevent them to say, okay, fine, we switch to another system?
Well, I would say bankers are still very worried that, okay, it took a long time back in 2017 to implement these things. They don't want to go through such a painful process again.
Yeah, still fresh in the memory.
Lots of money spent. And they can't believe that, okay, replacing that now with the new system, we have to go through that journey again, that long implementation track and so on and so forth. So bankers need to be convinced about that. Not only about that, but also about, okay, is it really going to save me costs then? Sometimes, as I said, sometimes they are a bit pushed by the regulator as well to have a look at that.
Yeah.
But I mean, our standpoint has always been, guys, don't believe a word we're saying. Let us do a proof of concept, and you'll be amazed in how fast we can turn around things. We have a couple of very nice of those case studies where we just proven it. We say, don't believe a word. Seeing is believing.
Yeah, it's a very, very strong message.
Yeah.
To break that barrier of resistance, I would say. Yeah. What do you see for the next 2 years in kind of upcoming regulatory trends?
Yeah, I said like, okay, in Europe we're in a bit of a regulatory, quiet period, but of course the big thing that's gonna come is Basel IV. Again, big focus in Basel IV on credit risk. Okay. Yeah, so the whole change of how risk weights are to be calculated, LTVs, loan-to-value ratios, and so on and so forth. So there's a big change.
So more on the credit risk side of Basel.
Again, credit risk. This is coming in 2025 in Europe. So originally it was 2023, it's been moved to 2025. We believe that 2025 deadline will be kept. We see other countries in the world already still going for the 2023 deadline. So that's the big event that bankers are getting ready for. They're doing pre-studies, they're doing quantitative impact studies of what the impact of such of that new requirement will mean to their capital requirements. Yeah. Of course, something which is a bit more under the attention right now is the whole topic of ESG. So if you ask me what are the trends, Basel IV is the 2025 thing where, 1 year banks will start about implementing those systems. ESG is hot. And then more specific on the E side, the climate risk, climate stress testing. ECB again issued some directions what to do around climate stress testing. And to keep on beating the same drum, is big impact on credit risk again. So it's still credit risk. So Basel IV, credit risk, IFRS 9, credit risk. And actually climate stress testing is again a lot on credit risk. So maybe to give a bit of an example there, climate stress test, what could that mean? Let's say you have a large corporate that you give loans to as a bank. That corporate is in a polluting sector, so they're gonna be taxed, carbon tax, more heavily in the coming years. That would affect their profit margins, EBITDA growth. Yeah, typically those margins are an input to the probability of default models.
Yeah.
So can you imagine if you want to stress that the profitability of a certain counterparty will go down, PD will be impacted as a result. Your PD has a direct impact on your expected credit loss numbers and immediate impact on your capital requirements. So you see how it actually all connected.
Yeah, it all hangs together.
It all hangs together.
Yeah. I spoke a month ago with Steve from Deloitte Australia about ESG. He also said, okay, you shouldn't look at that in isolation to ESG. It's part of a much bigger framework across the organization. So your advice would be for banks to look at it in combination of the change on the RWA and keeping in mind what's going on the ESG.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the challenges that I see from, we spoke about stress testing, yeah, we spoke about those detailed calculations required. Yeah, climate stress testing, again, is going to just make that problem bigger if it exists already.
Mm-hmm.
What do I mean with that? If you want to stress climate, you might have to stress counterparties based on addresses, based on industries they're in, based on locations, as mentioned, yeah, for physical risks such as flooding or whatever. But that means that's bottom-up stress testing, whereas before, bankers in stress tests relied on top-down, high-level views, high-level corrections. And at the same time, it's not really a stress test. Yeah, that's my other thing on climate. It's not really a stress test because stress test was like, okay, let's plan for that event that might happen. No, climate risk is happening.
Yeah.
So it's real.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a...
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a...
It's happening.
Yeah, it is happening.
Yeah, true. So probably when you mention stress testing, you're going to hit the same thing about the performance as you mentioned already for IFRS 9. So it probably makes sense from a credit risk point of view to address all these different things.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So performance, usability is another one. I mean,
Okay.
you don't want. I mean, in the end, we are talking about risk users that quickly want to run a stress test or run a number of scenarios without having to start coding, because that's not what they do. Yeah. They just want to quickly run a stress test, stress the rating of a counterparty, stress the collateral values, and so on. So it has to be, performance is a must, of course. It has to be quite easy to run these stress tests and then be able to report on them, the variances to management quite quickly, and regulators.
Yeah. So basically the regulators are driving from what used to be a traditional, reg reporting cycle to more kind of a risk management that you use in day-to-day operations. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a month-end process anymore.
Yeah.
It's a continuous risk management.
Yeah. So in your approach, you approach more the regulatory angle, or do you focus more on the kind of CRO approach?
More the CRO approach. Yeah, we try to. I mean, in a way, we don't have to convince CROs anymore about this. They know.
They say bread and butter. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing what we have to convince them of is that look at this, look at the new technology which is around there. You'll be surprised in how fast you can get output from an investment, and just in a couple of months you'll already get results out of a new system. So that's the thing we still have to convince CROs about.
So the time to market is fast.
Time to market is very fast.
Before.
Yeah. So we don't have to convince them about the topics, about the problem, about the need for such a system. It's more convincing. Are you sure you can replace my existing platform, which can't cater for all these things, and where we have to build bits and pieces around it to just keep the ball in the air, so to speak? That's what we need to convince them about.
Okay. Yeah. So the seeing is believing.
And that's when we say seeing is believing. Let's run a proof of concept.
Does that take a long time to actually?
No. I mean, depends of course on the scope of such a proof of concept. But we've run proof of concepts which take a week, where we say, look, we're gonna run this type of data through these kind of models, and this is how we would prove the stress testing and performance. Two, we just really take on a full position of the bank, and we run it through specified models that bank wants us to show that we can support their specific models.
Yeah.
Then we would be looking at a month to a month and a half proof of concept.
Oh,
but still,
fast.
in month and a half, the bankers will have complete trust that, this can really help me going forward. And it can help me prepare for the future. Yeah. Because, let's be honest, we spoke about a couple of these trends. They're not going to go away. They're only going to get more and more detailed requirements.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So thanks for the fascinating insight in where the regulators are, driving the European banks towards. More on a personal note, you moved away from Jakarta, Indonesia to Europe. Are there any particular things that you're missing from your Jakarta period?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things when people ask me, what you miss? Is it the food? Is it the life there? Of course, it's some of it, but what I miss most, the number one, is the people. How Indonesians approach life. We have a saying, joie de vivre.
Yeah.
They wake up with a smile, and they go to sleep with a smile, and they're smiling throughout the whole day. They're such a happy people. And it makes you happy while living there as well. You're always surrounded by just the joy and this
Carpe diem.
Carpe diem, yeah. And at the same time, you feel also, and it's nice to be in such a vibrant country in a way. I mean, it's fantastic. And that's what I miss. I wouldn't say that in Europe people are not happy. Don't get me wrong, but it's just so obvious that they are having that natural happiness. Yeah, and that's something I would say that's the number one thing.
Sure, I can testify to that. I go on a regular basis to Jakarta, and I love the Indonesian people for their lifestyle.
And then the outdoor life as well. Yeah. So if you'd ask me, okay, I mean, Europe, of course, different climate. Indonesia, it's much more outdoor. I mean, personal is more playing golf, for instance. Yeah, I do that a lot less. Yeah.
Your handicap is
it's going the wrong direction, yes.
Which is good news for me. Thank you, Mac, for the very interesting conversation. Yeah. For any financial firms out there who wants to see that the seeing is believing, please contact ElysianNxt. We are here to help you. Thank you very much for watching.